They were sealed away and forgotten, locked beneath dirt, concrete, and time. Some were buried for art, others by accident or disaster. Now, decades later, they're being dug up. What's left? Twisted metal, rusted dreams, and unbelievable stories. These are 12 cars buried 50 years ago, and you won't believe what they've become. The 1967 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 396 remains one of the most iconic American muscle cars of the 1960s. A prime example of what the muscle car era was all about: raw power, aggressive style, and a driving experience that was both thrilling and unforgiving. The Chevelle SS 396 was part of Chevrolet's first foray into the world of high-performance muscle cars, and it left a lasting mark on automotive history. At the heart of the Chevelle SS 396 was its 396 cubic inch V8 engine, which made a commanding 375 horsepower, an extraordinary output for the time. This engine was capable of launching the car from 0 to 60 mph in just a few seconds, placing it firmly in the ranks of the fastest cars on the road. The combination of a large, heavy body with an engine this powerful made for a car that was incredibly fast in a straight line, but one that could also be a handful to drive, especially for less experienced drivers. The exterior design of the 1967 Chevelle SS 396 was unmistakable. Sleek, muscular, and aggressive, with a long hood, wide stance, and bold lines that emphasized its raw power. The styling was a perfect match for the engine under the hood. From the wide front grille to the deep-set headlights and sharp curves along the body, every aspect of the design screamed performance. It was the quintessential American muscle car, built for those who wanted a car that was as much about presence as it was about speed. Inside, the Chevelle SS 396 offered a driver-focused cockpit with minimal frills and an emphasis on performance. The dashboard was simple and straightforward, with large, easy-to-read gauges, and the seating was designed for comfort while still providing the support needed to handle the car's raw power. But the real magic was in the driving experience. The rumble of the 396 V8 engine was something that could not be ignored, a deep, throaty sound that signaled the car's power before you even hit the accelerator. On the road, the Chevelle SS 396 was pure muscle. It could leave most cars in the dust, with acceleration that felt like it could break the sound barrier. The sheer force of the engine pushed you back in your seat, and the car would surge forward with a terrifying but exhilarating sense of urgency. However, it wasn't all sunshine and speed. The Chevelle's sheer power came at a price. The car had a tendency to be hard to handle at times, particularly when pushing it to its limits. The suspension, though solid, struggled to keep up with the raw power of the engine, and the car's rear end could easily break loose under heavy acceleration. It was a car that demanded your full attention at all times, and even experienced drivers sometimes found themselves fighting for control. But for all its thrills, the Chevelle SS 396 wasn't without its drawbacks. The car's immense power, combined with its weight and suspension setup, made it prone to excessive wear. The engine, which was capable of producing so much power, required constant maintenance to ensure it continued running at peak performance. If you were lucky, the Chevelle would serve you well for years. If you weren't, it could be a ticking time bomb of engine issues and mechanical problems. Many owners, especially those who were young and inexperienced, found themselves frequently blowing the engine, as Dave S., an owner, recalled in his review. "I had one of these in high school. It was fast, maybe too fast. I blew the engine twice. You never knew if it was going to make it through the week, but when it ran, man, it was a dream." Dave S. This unpredictability and reliability led many owners to abandon their Chevelle SS 396s by the 1970s, leaving many to rust away or be sold for parts. The lack of proper maintenance and the difficulty of keeping up with the demands of such a high-performance vehicle meant that the Chevelle SS 396, despite its legendary status, was often relegated to the forgotten corners of the muscle car world. Despite its mechanical flaws, the 1967 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 396 still holds a special place in the hearts of muscle car enthusiasts. For those who managed to keep it in good condition, it was a true dream car, a testament to the power and freedom that American muscle cars symbolized during the 1960s. It was loud, it was fast, and it was wild. It demanded respect, but when it ran right, it was nothing short of thrilling. Even today, the Chevelle SS 396 remains one of the most sought-after muscle cars for collectors. Its combination of stunning performance, aggressive styling, and the sheer power it packed under the hood makes it a car that continues to be celebrated in the world of classic cars. For those fortunate enough to experience it in its prime, it wasn't just a car, it was an adventure every time you hit the road. A true piece of American muscle car history, the 1967 Chevelle SS 396 stands as a symbol of a bygone era, one in which speed and power were kings and the road was a battlefield. The 1973 Mercury Montego GT was Mercury's attempt to carve out a niche in the intermediate muscle car market. Featuring a 351 cubic inch V8 engine and a design that was surprisingly stylish for the era, it had all the right ingredients on paper. The Montego GT was built to compete against cars like the Chevrolet Chevelle SS, Ford Torino, and Plymouth Duster, with its aggressive stance, sporty features, and performance-oriented engineering. Yet, despite these ambitions, the Montego GT never managed to make the lasting impact its creators hoped for. When the Montego GT hit the market, it was designed to appeal to those who wanted muscle car performance without the full commitment of something as large as a full-size muscle car. The 351 V8 engine, while not as powerful as some of its competitors, was still more than enough to provide satisfying acceleration and a respectable top speed. It was an engine that offered a mix of decent performance without the brutal power that could sometimes make other muscle cars a handful to control. The Montego's V8 was paired with a solid suspension system that, when functioning correctly, made it a competent performer on the road, especially for those who preferred a balance between comfort and power. The Montego GT also boasted a stylish exterior design. With its sharp lines, wide grille, and sporty profile, it was a car that caught the eye. Mercury managed to give it a muscular, yet somewhat refined look, an attempt to blend the best of both worlds, performance and aesthetics. The Montego wasn't as aggressive as some of its competitors, but still had a presence on the road that was hard to ignore. Inside, it offered a relatively comfortable ride for the time, with bucket seats and a straightforward dashboard that emphasized simplicity over luxury. However, the Montego GT's market appeal began to falter as the 1970s wore on. Rising gas prices, triggered by the oil crisis, and soaring insurance rates became major factors that led to the car's decline. What was once an attractive proposition for performance-oriented buyers soon became an impractical choice in a world that was shifting toward fuel economy and practicality. By the mid-70s, buyers were less interested in the high-performance cars that dominated the previous decade, especially when the cost of driving one became prohibitive. As fuel prices surged, cars like the Montego GT were no longer seen as viable options for many drivers. In addition, the insurance premiums for muscle cars were climbing steeply, making ownership increasingly expensive for those who had once considered them affordable performance cars. The Montego GT, which had once offered a balance of power and style, now seemed like a relic of a past era. The car's reliability was another factor that contributed to its eventual downfall. For many owners, the Montego GT became a constant headache. As Tom C., a former owner, recalls, "Bought one in '75. It looked amazing, but that car was a money pit. The ride was rough, the engine constantly had issues. I loved the look, but it just wasn't practical long-term." The Montego's engine issues were notorious, and many owners found themselves spending more time in the shop than on the road. The car's suspension, which was meant to provide a comfortable ride, often proved inadequate for the kind of rough driving some owners put it through, leading to a bumpy, uncomfortable experience. In the end, the Mercury Montego GT became a victim of both the changing automotive landscape and its own inherent flaws. What had started as a promising alternative to larger muscle cars became increasingly impractical as the decade wore on. It was a car that could have thrived in a different era, a time when performance and style were more highly valued than efficiency and practicality. But by the time the early 70s came to a close, the world had moved on, and the Montego GT, much like many other muscle cars of the time, faded into obscurity. Today, the Montego GT remains an interesting footnote in the history of American muscle cars. While it never became a true icon like its competitors, it still represents an important moment in the evolution of performance cars. Its stylish design and the promise of power make it a nostalgic favorite among those who remember the golden age of muscle cars, even if its reputation for reliability and practicality was far less impressive. For those who find one today, it's a rare glimpse into a past when muscle cars were king, and the roads were full of vehicles designed not for fuel efficiency, but for the pure joy of driving. The 1969 Dodge Charger 500 was one of those rare cars born with a racing pedigree, but unable to fully fulfill the promise of its racing roots in the civilian market. Created specifically to meet the demands of NASCAR, the Charger 500 was a more aerodynamic version of the already iconic Charger, designed to reduce drag and increase speed on the racetrack. However, despite its engineering improvements, it failed to make the same lasting impact as its regular Charger counterpart, and its road-going version didn't quite capture the public's imagination the same way. The Charger 500's most notable modification was its unique grille design, which was intended to help the car cheat the wind and make it faster in NASCAR races. Dodge replaced the standard Charger's front grille with a flush-mounted, more aerodynamic grille and added a special rear window that was slightly recessed. These tweaks gave the car a sleeker, more refined look, and while they certainly enhanced the car's performance in a racing environment, they didn't translate to the same level of success in the consumer market. On the road, the Charger 500 was a bit more docile than its muscle car siblings, not having the same ferocious performance or raw edge that made the regular Charger so famous. In terms of performance, the 1969 Charger 500 offered a mix of power and refinement, with several engine options, including the 383 V8, 440 Magnum V8, and the legendary Hemi V8. While these engines were certainly powerful, the Charger 500 wasn't necessarily the fastest muscle car of its time. Its focus was on balance, aerodynamics, and handling, qualities that set it apart from the brute force of its peers. The result was a car that offered a slightly more controlled driving experiences than the typical muscle car, with a ride that was a bit more refined, especially in comparison to the loud, aggressive nature of the regular Charger. However, it was the car's distinct design that truly set it apart from other muscle cars of the era. The Charger 500 was an understated version of the iconic Charger, with subtle refinements that made it feel just a little more sophisticated. While it didn't have the same high profile as the regular Charger, its unique styling and aerodynamic improvements gave it a different kind of appeal. The clean, aggressive lines of the Charger were enhanced by its modified grille, giving the 500 a look that was unmistakably powerful but with an added sense of polish. It wasn't as flashy as its counterparts, but it still had a raw, muscular charm that couldn't be ignored. Despite its pedigree and unique place in Charger history, the 1969 Charger 500 never became as famous as the more iconic versions of the car, like the RT or the regular Charger models. Part of this may have been due to its relatively low production numbers, as only about 1,000 were made, making it one of the rarer versions of the Charger. But it was also a matter of the muscle car market's changing tastes. By the late 60s, performance-oriented cars were increasingly becoming more about sheer power and aggression, and the Charger 500, with its focus on refinement and aerodynamics, didn't quite fit into that mold. As a result, the car never captured the hearts and minds of the masses in the same way that other muscle cars did during that era. Despite its somewhat muted legacy, those who did own the Charger 500 have fond memories of its performance and unique character. As Chris J., a past owner, reflects, "It didn't have the big following like the regular Charger, but I always liked the oddball nature of it. A little more refined, a little more aerodynamic. It wasn't the fastest, but it had class." His sentiments are shared by many who appreciate the Charger 500 for what it was. A special, albeit somewhat understated, version of one of the most iconic muscle cars ever built. Today, the 1969 Charger 500 is regarded as a collectible oddity, appreciated by enthusiasts for its rarity and unique connection to NASCAR history. It may not have had the same level of fame or success as the regular Charger, but it remains a fascinating piece of Dodge's muscle car legacy, showcasing a more refined, aerodynamic approach to the power and performance that define the muscle car era. Its place in automotive history may not be as loud or as celebrated as some of its peers, but the Charger 500 still stands as a testament to Dodge's ingenuity and willingness to push the boundaries of what a muscle car could be. The 1972 Dodge Challenger Rally remains one of the more obscure yet fascinating entries in the history of American muscle cars. While the Dodge Challenger itself would become one of the most iconic muscle cars of the late 1960s and early 1970s, the rally version was often relegated to the background, overshadowed by its more powerful big block siblings. Despite being overlooked by many enthusiasts at the time, the rally version of the Challenger was far more significant than its modest engine and somewhat understated design would suggest. It had the potential to carve out a legacy of its own, if only it had received the same attention and recognition that its more powerful counterparts enjoyed. The 1972 Challenger Rally was essentially a more affordable, entry-level version of the muscle car. At the heart of the rally was the 318 cubic inch V8 engine, which, while no powerhouse by muscle car standards, was more than capable of providing enough acceleration and driving pleasure for those who weren't necessarily looking for a track-ready car. With the muscle car era rapidly coming to a close by the mid-1970s and increasing restrictions on emissions and rising fuel prices, the rally found itself caught in a difficult moment in American automotive history. The large displacement engines that had once defined the muscle car era were becoming increasingly impractical and expensive to maintain, making cars like the Rally a more logical alternative. For a time, the Challenger Rally seemed like a sensible option for those who still wanted the visual impact and performance of a muscle car, but didn't need to go all out with the big block V8s. The car's 318 V8 offered respectable horsepower, around 230 horsepower, and while it didn't pack the punch of the 383, 440, or Hemi engines, it was still plenty of fun for a daily driver. In terms of performance, the Rally could easily hold its own in straight-line acceleration, but where it really excelled was in the balance between muscle and practicality. It offered an exciting driving experience that didn't require you to burn through excessive amounts of gas or deal with the maintenance nightmares that often came with the larger engine variants. Design-wise, the Challenger Rally was unmistakably part of the Challenger family. It boasted all of the iconic design features that made the Challenger so attractive: the aggressive stance, long hood, short rear deck, and muscular profile. The Rally trim even offered sporty visual upgrades, such as a blacked-out grille, hood stripes, and a Rally-specific dashboard. Inside, the car maintained its muscle car roots with bucket seats, a center console, and sporty instrumentation, all of which contributed to its bold character. However, despite its strong performance and visual appeal, the Rally struggled to find its place in the larger muscle car market. By 1972, the muscle car era was winding down. Manufacturers were beginning to shift focus towards smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles, and the insurance costs and fuel prices of the early 1970s were putting a serious strain on the muscle car market. The Rally found itself in direct competition with both the more powerful big block Challengers, which were increasingly expensive to own and maintain, and with the growing wave of compact cars and foreign imports that offered better fuel economy and more reliable performance. Unfortunately, the Rally's more modest engine made it an easy target for enthusiasts who were fixated on pure power. In a world where bigger was better, the 318 V8 simply didn't have the same wow factor as the 383 or the Hemi, and as a result, the Rally was often passed over in favor of the more powerful models. Even though the Challenger Rally offered a perfectly balanced blend of style and performance for the more budget-conscious driver, it struggled to gain traction with the wider muscle car crowd. This ultimately meant that the Rally became something of an afterthought in the Challenger lineup. Over time, the 1972 Dodge Challenger Rally began to fade into obscurity. While its more powerful brothers, especially the Hemi and the 440 versions, gained legendary status, the Rally was quickly overshadowed and became a forgotten variant. This lack of attention led to many Rally models being neglected, left to rust, or traded in for faster cars as the years went by. This was especially true as the muscle car market in the United States was being overtaken by the oil crisis, tighter emission standards, and the rising popularity of Japanese cars. Muscle cars that once ruled the streets were now seen as impractical and too expensive to maintain. Still, the 1972 Dodge Challenger Rally remains an intriguing piece of muscle car history. It represents a more restrained approach to the performance car, offering a balance between muscle car aesthetics and the reality of the times. In hindsight, the Rally could be seen as the last of a dying breed. The 1970 Pontiac Firebird Aspree is one of those understated classics that got swept away in the tidal wave of muscle car mania. While everyone fawned over the fire-breathing Trans Ams and Ram air-powered Firebirds, the Aspree quietly offered a different vision of American performance, one built more on grace and comfort than on tire-smoking brutality. It wasn't built to dominate drag strips. It was built to cruise, to look sharp, and to serve as the gentleman's Firebird in an era obsessed with excess. And yet, as time went on, it became the forgotten middle child in the Firebird family. Too tame for the muscle crowd, but too bold for those simply looking for a commuter. Pontiac introduced the second-generation Firebird in 1970, a car that was longer, wider, and sleeker than its first-generation counterpart. The styling was a bold departure, a long nose, a low-slung profile, and graceful curves that hinted at European influence more than brute American strength. The Aspree was positioned as the luxury trim level in the Firebird lineup, slotting between the base model and the rowdy Formula and Trans Am variants. It featured upgraded interior appointments, softer suspension tuning, and more restrained exterior styling. Think of it as the Firebird in a sport coat, still capable, but with its wild side tucked behind a button-down shirt. Under the hood, the Aspree didn't disappoint, at least not entirely. While the standard power plant was a 250 cubic inch inline-six, most Asprees came equipped with one of Pontiac's small block V8s, usually the 350 or the 400, depending on the buyer's taste and budget. Though not as earth-shattering as the Ram Air 400s or Super Duty blocks in the higher trims, these engines still provided satisfying torque and a surprisingly throaty growl. A well-optioned Aspree could churn out over 250 horsepower, which was more than enough to hustle the car around town or eat up highway miles with ease. The Aspree was never meant to be a race car. It was aimed at buyers who wanted a stylish personal coupe, something sporty-looking without the harsh ride or wild handling of the Trans Am. It had softer springs, quieter interiors, and less aggressive gearing. It wasn't going to smoke its tires on a whim, but it would get you to the country club or the drive-in in comfort and style. For many young professionals, especially women entering the new world of personal luxury cars, the Aspree hit a sweet spot. It was still a Firebird, it had attitude, but it didn't demand the same sacrifices in ride quality or insurance costs as its more aggressive siblings. But therein lay the problem. In an era obsessed with horsepower wars and straight-line speed, the Aspree was always fighting an uphill battle. It was too subtle for the muscle car faithful. Enthusiasts passed it over in favor of the Formula or Trans Am, models that screamed performance from every scoop and stripe. And because the Aspree wasn't marketed with the same passion or flash, it faded quickly into the background, despite selling in decent numbers. Worse, when the gas crisis hit just a few years later and insurance premiums skyrocketed, the Aspree, once seen as a practical performance car, found itself lumped in with the rest of the gas-guzzling pony cars. As Firebirds from the early 70s fell out of fashion, the Aspree became disposable. Many were driven hard, neglected, and eventually junked. Survivors today are rare, and even among collectors, they often take a back seat to the more collectible models. Yet for those who own them, the Aspree left a lasting impression. It was a car that offered just enough muscle to be fun, just enough refinement to be comfortable, and all the right styling to turn heads without shouting. It was especially popular among first-time buyers, like Angela F., who recalled, "My Aspree was my first car. Not a race car, but it was a lot of fun. It had some style, and the V8 engine gave it a nice kick. I loved it, but I'll admit it wasn't the car everyone wanted. Too bad." Her experience captures exactly what the Aspree was, a stylish, well-balanced car that was never meant to dominate the streets, but to make driving enjoyable. It was personal, nostalgic. A car you loved because it made you feel good behind the wheel, even if no one else gave it a second glance at the gas station. Today, the 90 Firebird Aspree is starting to earn a bit of retro appreciation, especially from enthusiasts tired of chasing the same overhyped muscle cars at Barrett-Jackson auctions. For those with a taste for the unusual, or who want to relive the quieter, classier side of the pony car era, the Aspree offers an affordable and refreshing alternative. And in a world now obsessed with overcomplicated tech and bloated horsepower numbers, maybe a stylish, torquey V8 coupe that rides smooth and looks sharp is exactly the kind of forgotten classic we need. The 1968 Oldsmobile 442 W30 was a masterstroke of hidden aggression, the kind of car that looked like it belonged in a dentist's driveway, but could outrun nearly anything at a stoplight. In a muscle car era dominated by loud paint, hood scoops the size of mailboxes, and badges screaming for attention, the W30 kept its power buttoned under a collared shirt. And yet, those who knew what it was really knew, understood that this was one of the quickest, most refined street warriors of the late 1960s. It wasn't just muscle, it was Oldsmobile muscle, smarter, smoother, and sneakier. The 442 name originally meant 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed transmission, and dual exhaust. But by 1968, it had grown beyond that into a full-fledged model rather than just an option package. And the W30, that was the real deal. The top-tier performance package that separated the weekend cruisers from the street terrors. It included a specially built 400 cubic inch V8 with forced air induction via under-bumper ducts, a hotter camshaft, high-flow cylinder heads, heavy-duty cooling, and a trunk-mounted battery for better weight distribution. It was factory muscle tuned to run hard and built to stay together under pressure. Rated at 360 horsepower and 440 lb of torque, the W30 had the numbers to impress. But those ratings were conservative. Oldsmobile engineers, known for their precision and pride, didn't inflate horsepower figures for magazine headlines. If anything, they undersold them. Many owners swore the W30 felt more like 400 horsepower in real-world driving. And with quarter-mile times dipping into the low 14 or even high 13-second range with slicks and a good driver, it could run toe-to-toe with Hemis, Cobra jets, and even early big block Chevelles, all while looking like the most respectable car at the country club. Unlike some of its brawnier competitors, the W30 wasn't just about brute force. Oldsmobile built its reputation on combining speed with civility. The 442 had a tighter chassis, better fit and finish, and more sophisticated suspension tuning than many of its peers. It didn't rattle your teeth loose or make you regret the drive to work. It was composed, cleanly styled, and remarkably well built. That was both its strength and ultimately its curse. Because in the Wild West of the late 60s muscle car market, the loudest and flashiest often got the glory. The W30 was quieter, more calculated. It didn't shout, but it always had the last word. From the factory, W30 cars came with red plastic inner fender wells, a signature touch that set them apart if you knew what to look for. But most people didn't. To them, it was just another Cutlass or 442. That subtlety made it the perfect sleeper, especially when paired with a bench seat and no vinyl roof. As owner Steve M. recalled, bought a W30 in '69. People thought it was just another Olds, but it had the power to shock anyone who tried to race me. It was one of the most underrated cars of its time, but it's hard to find one today. And he's right. Finding a real deal 1968 W30 today is like searching for a ghost, because these weren't garage queens. They were driven hard, often raced, and many were lost to time, accidents, or rust. Oldsmobile didn't build them in huge numbers to begin with, and those who knew what they had often modified them further, making original survivors extremely rare. But those who had one, or even just drove one, never forgot. The W30 wasn't about gimmicks. It was about execution. It was a car that could crush a quarter-mile run in the afternoon and then glide through dinner downtown that same evening. It was muscle with manners, speed with subtlety, and maybe that's why it never became the poster child of the era. It wasn't trying to be. It didn't need the spotlight. It just needed a green light. Today, the 1968 442 W30 stands as one of the most tragically overlooked muscle cars of its generation. Not because it lacked performance, and not because it lacked style, but because it dared to be different. In a time when everyone was shouting for attention, it whispered, and those who were smart enough to listen never forgot what they heard. The 1967 AMC Rebel SST stood as a bold declaration from a company often left out of the muscle car conversation, and yet it was anything but timid. While Ford, GM, and Chrysler were engaged in a high-stakes horsepower war, American Motors Corporation, that smaller, often overlooked underdog from Kenosha, Wisconsin, quietly built one of the more refined and misunderstood full-size performance machines of the era. The Rebel SST didn't roar onto the scene with the media fanfare of a GTO or Chevelle SS, but what it brought was a unique combination of power, subtlety, and elegance. A different kind of muscle car, one that asked you to look beyond the decals and see the engineering underneath. Let's start with what made it move. Under the hood of the 1967 Rebel SST was AMC's newly engineered 343 cubic inch Typhoon V8. This was a pivotal moment for AMC. Before this, they had relied on older engine designs, sturdy but uninspired. The 3.3 was a fresh start, an all-new power plant designed with performance in mind. In its 4-barrel configuration, it pumped out a respectable 280 horsepower and 365 lb-ft of torque, not earth-shaking by big block standards, but in a car that weighed just over 3,300 pounds, it offered serious performance. A 0 to 60 time in the low 7-second range was nothing to scoff at in 1967, especially from a company more associated with economy cars than quarter-mile times. But AMC's approach to muscle was different. Where others offered cartoonish graphics and drag strip posturing, the Rebel SST delivered a subtler kind of aggression. Its design was sleek and squared off, free of the wild scoops or decals of its competitors. The clean, almost European-inspired lines gave it a formal, upright look, more executive express than street racer. Chrome accents, a restrained grille, and hidden headlights gave it a touch of class, and the SST package added bucket seats, upgraded trim, and a center console. The interior was well appointed with a focus on comfort and usability. It was clear AMC wanted this to be a gentleman's muscle car, a car that could take you to a board meeting Monday morning and the drag strip Saturday night. It's that duality that made the SST such an intriguing anomaly. It was capable, fast, reliable, and responsive, but never flashy. And that was both its greatest strength and its fatal weakness. In the America of the late 1960s, subtlety didn't sell. The youth market wanted stripes, noise, and attitude. AMC's restrained, almost dignified approach to performance didn't resonate with the crowd that bought Roadrunners or Mustangs by the truckload. Despite its genuine capabilities, the Rebel SST never caught on in large numbers. Only about 7,500 SST two-door hardtops were built for 1967, making it rare from the start. That rarity, combined with AMC's niche market share, meant the SST had virtually no aftermarket support. Parts were hard to find, and few people restored them. Over time, they vanished. Rust claimed many, as AMC's rust-proofing was mediocre at best. Others were driven into the ground by second or third owners who didn't know or care what they had. By the late 1970s, the Rebel SST had already become something of an urban myth, a car people vaguely remembered but seldom saw. It had no TV fame, no movie stardom, no collectible buzz. It was just gone. And yet, for the few who owned them, the SST left a lasting impression. As Brad P., a former owner, recalled, "It was an oddball in a sea of Chevys and Fords, but that made me love it even more. It had a quiet power, and people didn't expect it to outrun them. AMC tried, but the competition was too tough." That's the story of the 1967 AMC Rebel SST in a nutshell. Quiet power, a car that could surprise you with its torque, stability, and poise, yet never tried to be loud about it. It was designed for the kind of driver who didn't need to prove anything, someone who preferred substance over flash. The kind of person who might enjoy beating a Camaro SS at a stoplight, then go home and read popular science instead of bragging about it at the diner. Today, the Rebel SST is a genuine unicorn. Survivors are scarce, and pristine examples are nearly impossible to find. AMC fans treat them with reverence, not just for their rarity, but for what they represent, a high point of American motors engineering, and a reminder that the muscle car era wasn't just about noise and neon, but sometimes about finesse and quiet rebellion. In the end, the Rebel SST lived up to its name, a rebel not just in name, but in spirit. It didn't follow the crowd, and that's what makes it unforgettable. The 1964 Buick Wildcat was something of a paradox in the muscle car era, a brute in a tuxedo. While other manufacturers were rolling out stripped-down raw performance machines designed to tear up the quarter-mile, Buick took a different road. The Wildcat was their answer to the growing demand for performance, but it came with the refinement and comfort Buick customers expected. It wasn't aimed at the high school drag strip crowd, it was for the guy who wanted a car that could burn rubber and arrive at the country club without raising an eyebrow. At the heart of the 1964 Wildcat was the nailhead 401 cubic inch V8 engine, known affectionately as the Wildcat 445, referencing its impressive 445 lb of torque. This was an engine that delivered massive low-end grunt, perfect for highway passing or launching the full-size coupe from a stoplight with authority. For those who wanted even more power, Buick offered the larger 425 cubic inch V8, dubbed the Wildcat 465 for its torque output, producing up to 340 horsepower in factory trim. That meant the Wildcat could outrun many lighter muscle cars in straight-line runs, despite its size. But unlike the GTO or the Fairlane Thunderbolt, the Wildcat wasn't a brawler. It was a cruiser with a dark side. Equipped with power steering, power brakes, and optional creature comforts like air conditioning and deluxe upholstery, the Wildcat was aimed at a mature buyer who wanted performance without sacrificing refinement. Inside, the car featured full instrumentation, a stylish console when optioned, and Buick's signature emphasis on soft, quiet rides. It was the kind of car where you could light up the rear tires and still hear your favorite AM station clear as a bell. Stylistically, the 1964 Wildcat struck a balance between aggression and sophistication. Buick's signature chrome trim, fender skirts, and restrained grille gave it a tailored look, while subtle badging hinted at its power. It was built on GM's full-size body platform, sharing underpinnings with the LeSabre and Electra, but tuned for sharper handling and firmer ride quality. Relatively speaking, of course. It wasn't a canyon carver, but for a nearly 4,200-pound car, the Wildcat was surprisingly composed. Still, that's where the Wildcat ran into trouble. It didn't really fit the mold. Too big and too plush to be a pure muscle car, but too fast and too bold to be just another luxury coupe, it existed in a gray area that confused both marketers and buyers. Muscle car fans saw it as a dad car. Luxury buyers didn't see the point of all that torque. And by the late 1960s, as the market polarized into either raw performance or high-end luxury, the Wildcat's identity crisis became a liability. Buick continued the nameplate until 1970, but its peak arguably came in those early to mid-60s years when it still carried a sense of bold experimentation. Owner Randy W. put it best when he said, "It wasn't flashy, but it could run with the best of them. I always liked the ride. It had a bit of class, which is probably why it didn't get the recognition it deserved." That sentiment sums up the Wildcat's legacy perfectly. It was a gentleman's muscle car, not a screamer, but a snarler. A car that could plant you in the seat without making a scene. In a world increasingly obsessed with drag strip numbers and macho styling, the Wildcat spoke in a quieter, more confident tone. It was powerful without shouting about it, and refined without being boring. Today, the 1964 Wildcat is largely forgotten outside Buick enthusiast circles. It doesn't get the auction buzz of a Chevelle SS or the poster space of a Mustang fastback, but for those in the know, the Wildcat remains a secret weapon, a rare blend of muscle, manners, and mid-century American cool. It's the car you buy not to impress others, but because you understand something they don't. And in that quiet, low-slung rumble, you can still hear it asking the question, why choose between power and class when you can have both? The 1963 Dodge Polara 500 is a car that time has mostly forgotten, but for a brief moment in the early 1960s, it stood on the threshold of something extraordinary. Before the full-blown muscle car era took shape, Dodge saw an opportunity to blend full-size comfort with race-bred performance. The result was a car that looked like a respectable boulevard cruiser, but, when properly optioned, could leave much flashier machines choking on its dust. It was a wolf in formal wear, elegant, substantial, and terrifyingly fast. At its core, the Polara 500 wasn't meant to be outrageous. Dodge offered it as the sport luxury trim of the full-size Polara, aiming it at buyers who wanted refinement with a hint of speed. It came with standard bucket seats, a center console, special exterior trim, and more upscale interior appointments. But what made the Polara 500 special wasn't its trim. It was the menu of engines you could get with it, especially if you had the right connections or just knew what to ask for. This wasn't just about stepping up to a 383 or a mild 413. You could, if you were brave and savvy, order one with the fire-breathing Charter 26 Ramcharger Max Wedge engine. This was no tame street V8. The Max Wedge was a drag-strip-bred monster, sporting dual 4-barrel carburetors, high-compression pistons, radical camshafts, and cross-ram intake manifolds that looked like alien technology. In its highest form, it was conservatively rated at 425 horsepower, though real output was likely higher. Dodge never intended this engine for everyday use. It had one purpose: total domination in straight-line acceleration. And yet, for a fleeting moment, you could order a full-size, relatively luxurious Polara 500 with this race-ready mill installed at the factory. But herein lies the tragedy. Dodge, caught between traditional family sedans and the emerging youth market, didn't know how to market this beast. There were ads, of course, grainy, smiling couples next to their spirited new Polaras. But the ferocity of the Max Wedge and early 426 Hemi engines was never front and center. There was no mystique like there was for the GTO, no showboating like the Mustang, and certainly no cartoon logos or cheeky names like the Roadrunner. The Polara 500 was too big, too quiet, too formal to capture the muscle car imagination. It didn't help that the full-size platform made it heavier and harder to throw around. It was a street weapon hidden inside a Sunday suit, and most buyers never noticed. Those who did, however, never forgot. They remember blistering straight-line runs, the way the rear end would squat and howl under throttle, and the difficulty keeping the thing pointed straight when all hell broke loose. They also remember the headaches, tuning the dual carbs, sourcing replacement parts for temperamental performance internals, and fighting with the early torque converters and transmissions that couldn't always keep up. Mechanics often scratched their heads when confronted with a Max Wedge Polara. Local parts stores rarely carried what you needed. If you didn't know what you had, it quickly became a nightmare. As owner Bob K. recalled, it was one hell of a car when it ran, but let me tell you, parts were impossible to find. I had to let it go after the third engine rebuild. Dodge didn't put enough effort into the model, and that's why it didn't make it. And that's the final nail in the coffin. Dodge simply didn't stand behind the Polara 500 the way it would support later models like the Charger RT or the Super B. There was no follow-up campaign, no cultural push. The muscle car boom was still finding its feet in 1963, and Dodge had fired a shot before the crowd was paying attention. By the time they figured out how to package and promote muscle cars, bold stripes, snarling names, advertising built around speed and youth, the Polara 500 was already old news. Today, the 1963 Polara 500 is one of the rarest and most misunderstood entries in Mopar performance history. Few remain, and fewer still are known to be factory-equipped with the Max Wedge engine. For collectors, it's a hidden treasure, a glimpse into what muscle cars might have looked like had the industry chosen a different path. And for the few surviving owners or fans, it's a symbol of a lost era, when performance was raw and uncompromising, before marketing departments turned power into pageantry. The 1963 Polara 500 didn't fail because it lacked power. It failed because it arrived too early, with too much seriousness and too little showmanship. In another time, with better timing and bolder promotion, it might have been remembered alongside the greats. Instead, it became a whisper, a ghost in the rearview mirror of muscle car history. The 1970 Ford Torino Cobra was a beast hidden in plain sight, a true muscle car warrior that rarely got the respect it deserved. At first glance, it didn't scream for attention like some of its better-known competitors. There were no cartoon birds, no wild color schemes with slapstick names, no famous movie roles or mainstream nostalgia to keep it alive in the public eye. But under the long, aggressive hood of the Torino Cobra was something that could terrify asphalt: the mighty 429 cubic inch V8, either in Thunderjet, Cobra Jet, or the downright brutal Super Cobra Jet configuration. It was a car built for the drag strip, yet sold in dealerships to anyone brave enough to handle it. Ford's idea with the Cobra was simple: take a mid-size fastback body, cram the biggest engine possible into it, give it a heavy-duty suspension and drivetrain, strip out the frills, and let it roar. The result was one of the most potent, straight-line performers of the era. The 429 Super Cobra Jet, when ordered with the drag pack, delivered up to 375 horsepower. But the real number was likely well above that. With 450 pound-feet of torque and solid lifter cams, it made its power high in the rev range and pulled like a locomotive through every gear. Matched with a C6 automatic or close ratio 4-speed manual and 430.1 rear gearing with a Detroit locker, the Torino Cobra could hit the quarter mile in the low 13s, on skinny stock tires no less. But despite its sheer performance potential, the Cobra was a strange orphan in Ford's lineup. It wasn't a Mustang, which meant it wasn't marketed to the youth crowd. It wasn't a luxury muscle car like a Buick GSX or a GTO. It didn't have the racing pedigree of a Boss 429 or the pop culture cachet of the Charger or Camaro. Even its name, Cobra, confused buyers who often associated it with Shelby's legendary two-seaters or later Mustang variants. Ford didn't do much to clarify the branding, and the Torino Cobra remained buried under poor marketing choices and an avalanche of competition. Stylistically, the 1970 Torino Cobra was a serious-looking machine. The fastback profile was sleek, almost European, with a long nose and tight rear quarters. The front end featured hidden headlights behind a full-width grille, giving it a clean, menacing face. Buyers could option a functional shaker hood scoop, hood pins, Magnum 500 wheels, and blackout trim. But even fully dressed, it looked more mature than flashy, which might have been part of its downfall. This was not a car that pandered. It demanded understanding. Inside, the Cobra was sparse. Ford focused on performance, not comfort. The interior was utilitarian: basic instrumentation, vinyl seats, and little in the way of creature comforts. Bucket seats and a console were optional, but many were sold with bench seats and column shift automatics. This was the muscle car for grown-ups, or at least for those who didn't need their muscle cars to scream for attention. The car's underdog status wasn't helped by timing. The muscle car market was peaking in 1970, but it was also starting to crumble. Insurance premiums for high horsepower cars were skyrocketing, and emissions regulations loomed on the horizon. The oil crisis was just a few years away, and manufacturers already felt the squeeze. Ford, perhaps sensing this, didn't heavily push the Cobra, and by 1971, the name and spirit had already begun to fade. The Cobra name was retired after 1971, and the Torino line shifted toward more conventional, personal luxury themes. Collectors today often overlook the Torino Cobra, which makes it one of the best-kept secrets of the muscle car era. Survivors are rare, especially in original condition, and Super Cobra Jet models with factory drag pack options are even scarcer. These were street brawlers, and many lived hard, fast lives before being junked or repurposed. But those who owned them never forgot them. As owner John D. remembers, "I had one for a while. It was fast, but people always ignored it. I don't know why it never caught on, but I love that engine. It was pure American muscle. That sentiment sums up the Torino Cobra perfectly. It was a car that didn't need validation from magazines or movie cameos. It didn't need neon paint or wild decals. It had the heart of a lion, massive displacement, raw power, and a chassis built to take the abuse. It was a car that didn't care if you remembered it, as long as you remembered what it did to you on the street. Today, the 1970 Ford Torino Cobra stands as a monument to a brief, glorious window in American automotive history, when performance mattered above all else, and when the fastest cars weren't always the ones people talked about. In the shadow of Mustangs and Chargers, the Cobra lurked. Quieter, meaner, faster, a true muscle car in the truest sense. Fast, rare, and fearless. The 1969 Chevrolet Camaro SS 350 is a fascinating example of what happens when a muscle car doesn't try to be the loudest or most aggressive, yet still delivers a thrilling experience. It is often overshadowed by the more infamous variants like the Z28 with its race-bred 302 V8 or the fearsome SS 396 with its monstrous 375 horsepower. But for those who sought a balanced blend of power, performance, and drivability, the SS 350 was the perfect answer. It was a car that didn't rely on excessive bragging rights or eye-watering horsepower figures to prove its worth, but instead found its place in the heart of car enthusiasts as a true performer that could easily be used as a daily driver. The Camaro SS 350 was not the biggest or the baddest car in the Chevrolet stable, but it was a car that understood its purpose. It featured a 350 cubic inch V8 engine, a staple for muscle cars of the era, producing a modest 300 horsepower. While it might seem modest in comparison to its larger siblings, the small block V8 was a joy to drive. It offered enough torque to pin you back in the seat while maintaining excellent drivability, especially at lower RPMs. This made it perfect for street driving, where the muscle cars of the era often excelled in drag racing, but faltered on winding roads or around town. The engine's smooth delivery made the SS 350 a surprisingly nimble and agile machine. Its power was well suited for daily driving, offering enough muscle to push it through the gears quickly without feeling overpowered. Its design, while not as overtly aggressive as the Z28 or the SS 396, still exuded muscle car attitude. The SS 350 had the same aggressive styling as its bigger brothers: a distinctive grille, dual exhaust, bold SS badging, and the classic cowl induction hood that signaled performance. It even had the option for the Rally Sport package with hidden headlights, adding an extra touch of elegance to its already muscular design. What made the SS 350 special was its balance. The larger engines in the Camaro lineup could be an intimidating handful with their monstrous torque and quick acceleration, but the SS 350 was more about finesse. It could still race down the quarter mile, but it wasn't as hard on the nerves or difficult to manage. This made it an ideal choice for those who wanted to enjoy the raw power of a muscle car without sacrificing comfort and usability. The suspension, while sporty, didn't punish the driver on daily commutes, making the SS 350 more practical than its big block counterparts. Many owners today look back on the SS 350 with fondness. Kevin F., who owned one in the past, reflects, "I had the 350 and I loved it. It wasn't as powerful as the 396, but it was nimble. I think people forgot about the 350 because it wasn't the big block, but it was just as fun." Indeed, the SS 350 provided a unique driving experience that allowed the driver to explore the limits of performance without feeling overwhelmed by power. It was fun, agile, and offered just the right amount of performance for those who wanted something a little less extreme than the SS 396 or Z28. But that very balance meant it often got overshadowed. In a time when more was always better, the SS 350 was somewhat lost in the noise. However, the beauty of the SS 350 lies in its understated elegance. It didn't need the massive power of the 396 or the racing pedigree of the Z28 to be an enjoyable muscle car. In fact, it was often the middle ground that offered the best of both worlds. Today, as collectors and enthusiasts have begun to appreciate the value of balance and practicality in classic cars, the SS 350 has earned a well-deserved place in the spotlight. It's the muscle car that didn't scream for attention, but still delivered when it mattered most. In hindsight, the SS 350 was a glimpse into a more refined approach to muscle cars, one where performance was about more than just sheer numbers. It was about the driving experience, the engagement with the car, and the ability to push it to its limits without worrying about a catastrophic mechanical failure. The SS 350 wasn't just a car to race, it was a car to drive, to enjoy, and to savor. Today, the Camaro SS 350 is a rarity in the muscle car world. Few have survived in pristine condition, and finding one with all its original parts and features is becoming increasingly difficult. For collectors, it represents a sweet spot in the Camaro's history, a car that didn't follow the trend of over-the-top performance, but instead focused on delivering a balanced, enjoyable experience. And for those who own them, it's a reminder that sometimes the best things in life aren't the loudest or the fastest, but rather the ones that find the perfect balance of fun, style, and performance. The 1969 Chevrolet Camaro SS 350 is a car that can no longer be overlooked or underestimated. It may not have been the loudest or the most powerful. The 1972 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray represents the end of an era for America's favorite sports car. Known for its iconic styling and thrilling performance, the 1972 model was the last of the chrome bumper Corvettes, a feature that gave the car its distinctive look and appeal. This version is often overlooked in favor of the newer models that followed, but to those who appreciate the classic Corvettes, the 72 Stingray stands as a symbol of what made the Corvette a legend. Under the hood, the 1972 Corvette offered a choice of V8 engines, including the 350 cubic inch V8, which was standard. This engine produced an impressive 200 horsepower, providing the Stingray with more than enough power to rocket down the highway or take on the tight curves of a mountain road. There was also the option for a more powerful 454 cubic inch V8, which, while an option for the more performance-focused driver, was often overshadowed by the smaller engine's balance of power and handling. But the true beauty of the 72 Stingray wasn't just its performance. It was how it combined raw speed with comfort and style. The car featured a sleek, aerodynamic body that still carried the classic curves and lines of the earlier C2 models, but with slight refinements that made it feel more modern for its time. The chrome bumpers, which were a hallmark of Corvettes from the 50s through 72, were still in place, giving it a nostalgic, vintage look that has become iconic in the muscle car world. Those bumpers also added to the Corvette's rugged, race-ready appearance, one that commanded attention wherever it went. For many, the 1972 model was the last of the real Corvettes. This is a sentiment shared by many owners, like Charlie R., who said, "The last of the real Corvettes, in my opinion. It had the classic look, and it felt like driving a race car. But after 1972, the car changed, and I don't think it was ever quite the same." This shift he speaks of refers to the gradual move away from the classic Corvette design after 1972, as the model began transitioning into a more refined and modern sports car in the coming years. The 1973 model and beyond featured several significant changes, including the introduction of federally mandated 5mm bumpers, which altered the car's appearance and gave it a more safety-conscious design. The 1972 Corvette Stingray, with its original chrome bumpers, represents the end of a line of Corvettes that balanced aggressive performance with visual appeal in a way that many enthusiasts argue was never quite replicated. The 1972 Corvette is also significant because it marked the last year for the option of the LT1 engine, a high-performance package that turned the Stingray into a true street racer. The LT1 engine offered 255 horsepower, which, although not the most powerful engine available, was more than enough to make the Corvette a force on the road. This engine was highly prized by performance enthusiasts for its ability to deliver thrilling acceleration and a distinct growl that only a Corvette could produce. Despite its immense capabilities, the 1972 Corvette has largely been overshadowed by its successors. As the 1970s progressed, Corvette's image began to shift, moving away from the raw, untamed nature of its early years to something more refined and focused on comfort. While this made the Corvette a more attractive option for a broader audience, many enthusiasts, like Charlie R., felt that something essential was lost in the transition. The 72 model may have lacked some of the extreme performance and refinement of later versions, but what it did have was an undeniable connection to the past, to the Corvette that had been a dominant force on the racetrack and a symbol of American muscle for over a decade. For those who appreciate the classic design and the thrill of raw performance, the 1972 Corvette Stingray is more than just a car. It's the last vestige of the golden age of Corvettes, a time when muscle, style, and unbridled freedom defined what it meant to be an American sports car. Today, the 1972 Corvette Stingray is a collector's dream. Its chrome bumpers, sleek lines, and raw performance make it a standout in the world of classic cars, and its status as the last of the chrome bumper Corvettes only adds to its allure. While it may not have received the same widespread recognition as its newer counterparts, those who appreciate the true essence of the Corvette often regard the 72 model as the final piece in the puzzle, the last of the real Corvettes, as Charlie R. aptly put it. For those who are fortunate enough to own or drive a 1972 Corvette Stingray, there's a sense of nostalgia and a connection to the past that makes the car all the more special. It's a reminder of a time when muscle cars ruled the road, and the Corvette was the undisputed king of American sports cars. The 1970 Corvette Stingray may not be as famous as the ZR6 or the ZR1 that came later,